Perfect. Now I have your number. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Robbie Kramer. You're listening to the Leverage Podcast, where we discuss using your social skills to hack dating, travel, finding your dream job, and becoming a complete man. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is your too cool for school host wearing his sunglasses at night. It's not because I think I'm cool, it's because I have an eye infection actually, and this light in front of me is really bright. But enough about me. Today we have a very special guest, and his name is Paul Cope. Wait, did I pronounce that right? Paul Cope or Paul Cope?
Right, now Cope.
Paul Cope, good. Paul is an author, entrepreneur, coach, and formerly a corporate lawyer. And he transformed his life after finding himself in his mid-30s depressed and suicidal, despite achieving everything we're told should make us happy. So he tore everything down, spent tens of thousands of dollars, pounds on and hours and his energy dedicated to finding the root causes of why he felt unfulfilled, despite everything he'd achieved. And luckily, he figured out the secret behind all of our problems in life, which I'm super excited to find out more about because, we all have problems, of course, and who doesn't want to solve our problems? And he even wrote a book on the topic, and it's a hot book in the personal development world. And no matter what your problem is, his book, How to Solve Any Problem in Life, The Root Cause of Everything, will help you overcome it. So, Paul, welcome to the show, and happy to agree to come on.
Thanks, Robbie. Good to be here.
So tell us, how did you, get into this and solve your own problems that led you to, helping others?
So the very short version of it is, as you said in the intro. Then I used to be a corporate lawyer, and I was one of those kids who knew what they wanted to be. Like, if you asked me when I was 5 years old, I would tell you I wanted to be a solicitor, and that was my story all the way through my life.
Wait, a solicitor is another word for a lawyer, attorney?
I said, well, yeah, we've got definition stuff already. So yeah, in the UK, you have two types of lawyers. You have solicitors and barristers. So barristers are the ones you'd see with the white wigs on, who go to court on TV shows, and solicitors traditionally do work outside of court. So the route I went down was to be like a corporate lawyer. I started calling it lawyer later on because I realized it was cooler. And also, when I was a kid, I couldn't even say the word solicitor properly. I was a slow developer in the speaking terms. So there was this family story that I was always told, that when I was 2, I was in the back of my dad's car, and I'm 40 now, so this is back in the day. I don't know the age of whoever's listening, you might not even remember this stage. This is before iPhones and iPads and everything. So when I was a kid, we just had these plastic steering wheels, and you'd stick it to the window with a rubber sticker. And so I'd sit behind my dad and pretend to drive the car, and he's sitting in front of me driving the car, and we stopped at traffic lights, and a black Porsche pulled up next to us. And apparently I said to my dad, "Whose is that car?" And he said to me, "It's our solicitors." And I said, "I want to be a solicitor then." And that I don't remember that story. I was only 2 or 3.
Right.
But it was told to me over and over and over again as a kid. And as a little kid, and this is where loads of these stories go back to, and the stuff I do now. As a little kid, basically what I was doing was pleasing the grown-ups around me. So if I said something, they were all delighted. When I got in that day, my dad says to my mum, Guess what Paul said in the car? Tell your mum what you just said." And I said, I think about this. I'm a 3-year-old kid. I don't even know what these words mean. I say, I want to be a solicitor. And all these grown-ups get really happy. So I was like, well, it sounds like a good thing to say. they get happy.
I was going to ask what 5-year-old has the dream to become an attorney. That's not typically something you pick until...
Absolutely. And bear in mind, I'm from a very normal background. I'm from a working class background. So I was, at that stage, no one in my family had even been to university. So for me to say I wanted to be a lawyer was wow, this is the new golden child, and he'll be the savior of the whole family. So this story gets told on loop all the way through my life. And even in school, I'm like, yeah, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. I end up in law school. I end up in university doing a law degree. There's a big long story behind this, but this is the short version. And it was at that point I was like, hang on. The only reason I'm doing this is because I said when I was a kid I wanted a good car, basically. If my dad, when I said to my dad, whose is that car? If he'd have said to me, you can be whatever you want, son. Like you can do anything and buy a nice car. Don't worry about it. Just make yourself happy. I would never have been a lawyer. So
Wow.
there's so many stories behind this, which are in my first book about changing careers. I ended up carrying on down this path, became a successful lawyer, worked for big international law firms, ended up starting my own law firm when I was 29, built it from nothing, ended up with big clients, a team of people, city centre offices with glass walls. And I basically built the life. I always say if you'd have looked at my life from the outside, at the peak of my mum and dad being proud of me. So for all the stuff as a child you're raised to do, I owned a company, I had money, I had a beautiful wife, I lived in an amazing city centre apartment, I owned 5 investment properties, I drove a flash car. At the peak, I always say, my mum and dad go to the church club on a Saturday night and have a drink with their mates. Mm-hmm. They'd be saying, "How's your Paul?" And they'd say, "Oh, he's fantastic." And I used to have friends of their friends, kids would say to me, "We get sick of hearing your name because all we get told is, why can't you be more like Paul Cope? Like, why can't you do what he's done?" And I would say to people, this is by my mid-30s. At the peak of that, I was at my most depressed. I was literally sitting in my office of a weekend thinking about not even this. I mean, this is how dark it got. My dad used to be in the insurance industry. So I knew that if I killed myself, my insurance policies wouldn't pay out. And I had really expensive insurance policies because I had health problems and they would cost me a lot of money. And I was like, well, I can't kill myself then because the insurance won't pay out. I might as well kill my mum if I'm going to kill myself because it'll ruin her life. So I used to sit there and fantasize about how I could end my life, but get someone else to do it for me. And I'd be sitting there coming up with the details of, well, if I got someone to shoot me late at night on my way home from work, how would that work? What if they missed? What if they got it wrong and they just gave me brain damage? What? And this is how dark my life had become. And slowly over the next couple of years, I got to a point, there's loads in there that happened, but I just got to a point where I was like, I need to sort this out. I had all kinds of personal issues. I had chronic health problems. I was miserable I was married and I'd been in a relationship for over 10 years, was miserable in that, was miserable at work. Despite making loads of money, was always skint. I was spending money as fast as I was making it. And I just got to a point where I was like, I need to sort this out because I had all these high level issues, which I look back on now. And I started seeing a therapist, which was huge. And then started working with a coach for my health problems and another coach for business things. And I was working on all these different problems in different parts of my life. And then I realized I was always, even as a lawyer, I would always say to clients, look, we need to find the root causes of problems because something I hate about life is we treat symptoms. So in all aspects of the world, people are always just looking at symptoms, papering over the cracks. And I was like, no, we need to get into the root. So I'm looking at all these high level problems. And as I traced each one down to the root, just one day I was like, they all come to the same place. This is all coming back to the same place. And I started working on this thing and then completely transformed my life. Like I'd never before in my life ever felt peaceful or content. I was always driven and ambitious and trying to do more. And no matter what I did, I was never happy. There was always needed to make more money, always needed to buy more houses, needed a more beautiful wife, needed a bigger car. And the thing I got to when I went through all this was the root of it all was, you can call it different things, but low self-worth, low self-esteem, basically the feeling that we're not good enough. Like I'm not good enough as a human. And that all traces back to childhood. So I started doing all this work basically on childhood trauma and experiences and self-worth on myself. And all of a sudden, all of these things just magically, rather than working on the things themselves, I worked on the root and all of the other stuff took care of itself. And then one day, which is about 15, 16 months ago now, I thought, do you know, it was when the COVID started and I was like, well, maybe this is something that could help other people. So I started coaching people online because I could do it via Zoom, even with lockdowns. And I started coaching people all around the world. I've got clients in Sydney, Miami, Dubai, Singapore, the UK. And people would come to me with all different kinds of problems: drug addictions, problems with family, problems with work, depression, suicidal thoughts. And we would work on the same thing, and these things all disappear.
Mm. So where do you start for something like that? Because everyone is so typically is kind of what I call asleep at the wheel, getting their to-do list done, striving to do the things on the to-do list, which will get them to their version of happiness. So what was it specifically for you that, I mean, it sounds like it was a lot of the suicidal thoughts, but like what allowed you to kind of like snap out of that line of thinking and be like, okay, let's go after the root cause instead of the symptom?
Well, the thing that triggered me to do something about it was, and I often talk to people about this, about depression and suicidal thoughts, that even the way most people, I used to love the old personal development world and self-help world, and I don't anymore. I think a lot of it is actually quite damaging because of the stuff the type of work I do now. And one of the problems around depression and suicidal thoughts especially is that people tell us, even that they're based on, and low self-worth is based on shame. So from a very early age, without realizing it, we teach our kids to be ashamed of themselves. We teach kids to be that part of them isn't good, and that's not acceptable. So, for example, this obviously goes very deep. To give a quick overview, like think what we say to kids from the very start. We say things like, "Don't cry, don't be afraid, don't be angry." But actually, these are all perfectly natural human emotions. These are just part of being a human. Every other animal on the planet feels these emotions and just gets on with it. But by being taught to suppress them, what we're actually teaching deep down is to be ashamed of a part of us. So you fast forward 20, 30 years later, 40 years later, to when people are suffering depression and suicidal thoughts. That's built on shame as well. It's built on a feeling of I'm not good enough. So when people naturally, and people are just trying to help, but what they will naturally say to people is, you shouldn't be suicidal. You've got everything to live for. Your life's great. Well, all that does is send you the message that now you should be ashamed of yourself for feeling suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always say to people is, no, the way we break this cycle is we stop being kind to ourselves. So if you feel depressed or suicidal, that's okay. And the part of my story I always share is where I got to was, well, look, my ultimate solution here is death. Well, how about I just try some other things before I hit the final button? Because that option is there. It's not going anywhere. And when I sat down and was like, well, why do I want to kill myself? And I wrote down all of the things that were wrong in my life. I was like, well, okay, rather than go straight to the final option, why don't I just take each one of these and try and sort them out? And it was by taking that step that then I got help. And that's what led me down this rabbit hole to where the root cause is, or where my belief. This is a theory that other people have as well. Once I'd gone down the hole, there's other people out there who believe this already. And by working on that, then it just all started to make more sense.
Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself suicidal kind of after you had achieved a lot of the things you wanted as a kid and realized like, wait, I did all that and I'm still not happy. What the hell else is left? Was it that sort of feeling?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. And the more experience I've had in this field and speaking to people all around the world and studying things, is that's a huge part of this. So a lot of the people who come to me have reached a point in their life where they're like, is this it? Mm-hmm. Like I was brought up to believe this stuff would make me happy. Like the more money I would have, I'd be happy. If I had a beautiful wife, I'd be happy. If I got a beautiful husband, if I got kids, if I bought a big house. And I mean, don't get me wrong, lots of people go through their entire life still doing this, still chasing, saying they'll get to £1 million, $1 million, €1 million, and think, well, obviously 1 million wasn't enough. It needs to be 10 million. And then that'll keep them busy for the next 10 years, just burying all of the stuff. And then when they get to 10 million, they realize that's not enough either. Some people just keep going down that path, which is why we end up with billionaires, in my opinion. These
Right.
lots of the people we are taught to look up to in society suffer from this. It's for me, this is the biggest pandemic on the planet. It's practically every human I've ever met, and because we've built a society around it, it's been normalized. So for me, and for most of everyone I've ever coached, and most people I've seen, that's exactly what it was. It's getting to that point. There's lots of stuff you can read about. Gold medalists at the Olympics are famous for it. You spend 4 years or 8 years or 12 years training towards something. Then you get the gold medal and you stand on the podium and someone puts it around your neck and they play your national anthem. And then you walk into the dressing room and nothing's changed. only now you've got nothing to aim for in life. Mm-hmm. So there's classic studies that show that silver medalists in Olympic Games are often happier than gold medalists, because if you get a silver medal and you come off the podium, you know what you're doing with your next 4 years of your life.
Right.
You're going for gold, baby.
Yeah.
Whereas the gold medalist is like, well, what do I do now? And I still don't feel great. Like what happens now? Someone I've been coaching for a while, she was building for ages she was a lawyer as well, and she was building up for ages to hand in a notice and change her job. And lots of the work we were doing was to give her the self-worth to be able to do that, to go and do something she actually wanted to do with her life. And she was telling me last week the story of handing in a notice. And she'd built this thing up and up and up. And the day she went into her boss and handed in the notice, it was like, okay. And then she left the office and nothing had changed. The world was still moving in the same way as it was before. You walk down the street, the people are still, nothing's changed in their lives. You go home, you tell your parents, they may be upset, they may not be upset, they may not care less, they might not listen. And then you sit there thinking, well, what was I doing? Why have I wasted all this time?
So what do you, so let's say you're coaching this gold medalist, right? And they walk off that podium and they've got, they're kind of stuck in that quandary. And it's interesting you say that, because the most unhappy time in my life was a very similar experience. I had kind of reached the peak of kind of embarrassing to say, but being like almost a pickup artist. Like I never call myself a pickup artist, but my goal was to become the most successful guy with women that I could become. And I reached that goal in like 2018. I was traveling the world, going on yacht trips with Playboy bunnies and having like a Hugh Hefner sort of lifestyle. Everyone was jealous of it. And after a while, I was like, okay, well, this is actually really boring and I don't know what the hell to do next. Which, when you say those sorts of things to other people that look up to you, you just sound like an asshole, of course. But it's true. So what do you tell that gold medalist? And if you can get into a little bit of like the basics of your theory and how it solves these problems, that'd be interesting too.
So with the medalist, I should say before we get into that, actually, what you just said resonates massively with me. I never went to your level. And I often say this about lots of things in life. When you hear stories of very famous people, I often sit there and think, yeah, it resonates with me. I was never a superstar. But in my local environment, I was well known and got lots of women and had big clients and made lots of money, and everything's relative. And right. I'm guessing you and a listener will have probably heard this, but there's a famous Jim Carrey quote where he basically says along the lines of, I wish everybody could experience being rich and famous, because then they'd know it's not the answer. And I know exactly what you're saying, because for people who've never experienced it, men especially, like if you say to men, well, once you can get whatever woman you want, it gets boring. Mm-hmm. But for a man who's never experienced that, they're like, well, you're just an arsehole.
Totally.
But for people who've experienced anything like that, and that's why money is a big thing in life. So many people think it's not having money that makes them unhappy, and that's why there are studies all over the world that show that lottery winners become depressed.
Yeah,
because someone gives you the money, and then you go, "Oh, hang on, it's the same thing as the gold medal." You still wake up the next day, and all of your problems are still there, and now you've just got $10 million in the bank. they didn't really help. So with the gold medalist, it depends. The work I do is with the aim of getting in to help people before it gets to that point, because you can then say to people, one of the biggest questions, when I first started seeing my therapist, he asked me a question towards the start of our work together. And he said, you're always talking about other people. You talk about your mum, you talk about your wife, you talk about your dad, you talk about your mates. But he just leaned forward in his chair and said, what do you want in life? And I remember it felt like he just reached across and punched me in the face. I was like, well, if I take all of those people out of it, I don't know. Like, what do I actually want? Because I'd spent my whole life, remember, programmed with this. I'll be a lawyer. That'll make people happy. That okay. And one of the big things I work on with people is, what do you actually want? And it sounds like a very simple question. But when you stop and ask yourself that question and say, look, forget everybody else. Forget there's any conditions. If you could do anything in the world right now, what would you do? If you didn't have to please your wife, if you didn't have to please your husband, if you didn't have to please your parents, what would you do? And that's what lots of things we bring all the way back to. For the person who's won the medal, and I've been coaching an ex-professional footballer in the UK who's gone public with his story about depression, and I'm going to release an interview with him in the next few weeks. It's very similar. It was the look, I had this career, I achieved all the things. And one of the things he said when I spoke to him was, when I finished, I was like, I think that was rubbish. My career was rubbish. And I was like, wow, like he played for Liverpool, he played for England, he was at the highest, he was at the top of the game. And so where we go from there is, well, okay, what's next? Let's go back into the work that I do with everybody. And this is the interesting thing. When whoever comes to me with whatever problem, we don't talk about the problem. A guy came to me months and months ago from Liverpool, and he said to me, look, I've got a drug addiction, I've got an alcohol addiction, I've seen a therapist, it hasn't worked, I'm going to lose my family, I've got a little boy, my missus is going to leave me, can you help? I was like, yeah, let's get into it, we'll get stuck into it. And we started talking about things, and we'd have a fortnightly call, and then I'd give him exercises to do in between. And about 8 weeks later, I remember we got on a call, and he said to me, he came on the call laughing, and he said, do you know what's really interesting? He said, before we started this call, I couldn't remember why I came to you in the first place. I had to remind myself I used to have a drug addiction. He said, I don't take drugs or drink alcohol anymore. And I was like, that's really good to hear. And he said, but there's something stranger than that. And I said, what? He said, we haven't talked about drugs or alcohol once. And I said, I know, because it's got nothing to do with drugs or alcohol. These are the high level symptoms that everybody else focuses on, which leads us into what do we talk about? So where I take people is a few different places that all overlap and interlink, and obviously go very deep and take weeks. But the summary is, we go into childhood, we talk about childhood trauma. And one of the big things about childhood trauma, that this was a breakthrough I had while I was doing the work. I had a really nice childhood. So when I read about people who have traumatic childhoods, I'd be like, well, that wasn't me. People who were abused, or their parents were drug addicts or alcoholics or whatever. And you'd see, I think if you said to most people, someone's a mass murderer and their parents abused them when they were a kid, I think most people, they might not understand it fully, but they'd say, yeah, we can see the connection. You're abused as a child, you have problems later in life. Something I realized when I delved into this world was, trauma is something we all experience as children. Childhood is traumatic, full stop. The problem we've got as grown-ups is we look at childhood through the eyes of adults. But if you start looking at it through the eyes of kids, everything's traumatic. Like, an example I always give is, like, think about a kid dropping in ice cream.
Right.
Like, a kid drops in ice cream, and the way they cry about the ice cream is like the whole world has ended.
Oh, yeah.
And as a grown-up, we say to them, well, I'll just buy you another ice cream. And I was saying this to my dad a few weeks ago. My dad's 75 now. I was trying to explain to him what I do. And he said, yeah, but I'd have said to you when you were a kid, well, don't worry about it, I'll buy you a new ice cream. And I said, let's put it in context as a grown-up. I said, imagine if you came home from work one day when you were still working and your house had gone missing. So everything that you had in that house that you had an emotional attachment to, all your possessions, they've just vanished. And I walk past and say, don't worry about it, I'll just buy you a new house. But would that be okay? Would that make it okay? And he went, no. I said, exactly. So
Right.
that child, the ice cream is such an emotional thing.
Uh-huh.
And this is where, so the dropping the ice cream is traumatic. And then the experience of their parents saying to them, just get over it. Why are you upset about this? That's also traumatic, because what you're being told is the emotions you're experiencing are not acceptable. So where that leads us to, and this happens to all of us, think how basic that example is. So this happens to every child pretty much on the planet. Unless
I
you had
lost
a
my
parent.
balloon. That was my thing.
There you go. Does that just bring into your mind then?
Oh yeah. My parents tell me the story. They're like, one time you had this balloon, you were 2 years old. The balloon, you let go and it flew away and you were upset for a week.
There we go. Perfect example.
Yeah.
So where this leads to, what I always say, look, think about, and I can talk about this for hours, so I'm going to try and keep it brief, but think about a child. When a child is born, they're whole. They're an entire whole human. We feel everything, our emotions. Think about when a child cries. Think about a toddler in a supermarket having a temper tantrum, lying on the floor. They don't get their own way, so they lie on the floor and kick their legs and scream. Think of a child laughing. Like when a kid laughs, it's infectious, makes everybody else laugh. Now fast forward to thinking about grown-ups. How often do you ever see a grown-up cry the way a child cries? Or imagine if you went into a supermarket and there was a 50-year-old couple and the husband was lying on the floor kicking his legs and screaming. Yeah, exactly. And if they said, why are you doing this? And he said, she won't let me have any beer. Everyone would be like, that's insane, stop it. And the laughter thing, we don't laugh as much as grown-ups as you do as a kid, because we've been taught as children to suppress. Because people say to us, no, they don't do it purposefully, and it's nobody's fault. It's done with the best of intentions. This isn't acceptable. This part of you isn't acceptable. So what we do is we start to condense who we are. And then what we start to do, one of my favorite parts of the work I do with people is, one of the biggest lies we've been told is that there's only one of us. So up until I start doing this work, I was like, yeah, it's just me, just Paul, just Robbie, whoever is listening, whoever you are. What I learned through all this and the way I explain it to people is, I like to explain things to people in a like non-scientific way that most people resonate with. Always think about like this is a huge system. Your body is a huge system, and in your head is a control deck. So it's like, think of like the Starship Enterprise, or something out of Star Trek, one of those big ships, and it's got these control decks where they fly it from. And you've got a captain and you've got a team of people in there, all these switches and levers and screens. And they exist to run your system. That's their job. Their job is to meet your needs and to keep you alive. And from a very early stage, the world comes at you and it's too much. Most of us children tend to be quite introverted, quite quiet. We come out into this loud world. It's really noisy. And we start facing challenges. And what happens is the team comes to you and says, can you deal with this? You've been told you're not allowed to be angry, you're not allowed to be sad. Can you deal with what is happening? And the original us, little me, little Paul, little Robbie, what you might hear referred to as the inner child in like traditional self-help worlds, says, no, I can't do it. So what the team in your head does, it goes, don't worry about it. We've got a lab in the back and we'll go in and we'll create a new version of us. And over the years, we start to create more and more of these versions of us. And when I first heard of this, as I was changing my life, I went to Bali for a few months, years ago. And a girl was giving this presentation and she said, so what we end up with is a load of different personalities. Mm-hmm. And she said, the best way to think of it is to name them. So she said, for example, I've got a personality in my head who complains all the time. And I used to work with someone called Susan who complains all the time. So I call her Susan. She said, think of your own personalities, the different personalities you've got, and give them names. And I remember sitting there laughing to myself thinking, my personalities are so prominent I don't need to give them names because they've already got names. And it was funny when you introduced me, you actually named one of my personalities. So I've got my nickname used to be, and still is to some people, Copy, based on my nickname, based on my surname. Copy was basically a character that I created because at heart, I was a shy little boy growing up. And I was born into this very loud family, very outgoing, very extroverted city, expected to be able to go, especially as I got older, go out drinking, interact with people, talk to people, do karaoke. And I created this persona called Copy. And he dominated my life. So what we end up with is all of these different personalities. And the way I like to think about it is, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but the way I like to think about it is, we create all these personalities. So think about them on a stage. It's your cast. There's not just one of you anymore. There's loads of you, but there's only one microphone. So at any one time, only one person can be on the mic. And before you do this work, it's your subconscious that decides who's on the microphone. So your subconscious, basically, depending on the environment, depending on what's going on, depending on what you need to do, passes the mic to one of the characters. So the question for you, what I love doing when I first start talking to people about this is, do your characters spring to mind straight away? The ones, I always say the ones that come to mind straight away, so like my Copy, and I've got another one called Cope. Some people would just call me Cope, my surname. He was the lawyer. He was the guy. Have you ever seen Pulp Fiction?
Yep.
Do you know, so the guy Harvey Keitel plays, Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
The fixer?
The fixer, exactly.
That's Cope. So
Okay.
if people want to sort shit out in their life, they phone Cope. They don't phone Paul, and they don't phone Copy. Cope can get people out of any situation. And he's a different personality to me, and he's a different personality to Copy. He's got different characteristics. And I would say the first people you can think of are like your rock star characters, the ones that are most prominent. So can you think of any in yours?
Yeah, I haven't named them, but I mean I love what you're saying because it's so real. And I actually dated a girl who named all of her personalities. Like when I met her, she was Carly, and then she was Carlita, and then she was Carlton. Like she had all of them named.
Love
and
it.
we used to tease her that she had MPD or multiple personality disorder, and she was like, "Well, don't we all?" And, from
Very
the sound of it,
wise.
we do, yeah. And it's very true. Like I definitely have all sorts of different hats, and I had another kind of spiritual teacher who called them like mythologies. Or masks that you wear that are just your different aspects of your personality depending on when you need them. And that was interesting what you said about your subconscious chooses them, but it sounds like after you do the work, you become a little bit more aware. So your subconscious isn't choosing them, or where were you kind of going with that?
Yeah, absolutely that. So the work I do, it comes in phases. So there's the first phase is to truly, for the first time, see yourself for who you are. So when you start identifying all of these personalities, what we can then do is understand for the first time why we created them. Because they're all there for a reason, even the ones, and as we go into the work, what you realize is there's certain personalities you have that you don't like. And that's where the problem lies. Because if we keep going everything back to, okay, the ultimate problem is self-esteem, self-worth, I don't feel good enough. Well, actually, it's the part of you don't like that you don't feel good enough. So what we really get into is which of these characters don't we like and why? And what do they do for us? Why do they take the mic? Like in which situation would they take the microphone? And what we then start to do is reunite the team. So the way I like to think about it is what we talk to each of these characters and we say, look, thank you for all the help you've given me up until this point in my life. I needed you. Otherwise, I would never have created you.
Right.
What I want you to do now is train me, train little Paul how to do the things I couldn't do before. Because then you can retire. You can just become a consultant. You can stay on the trip. And this is the thing about the part of us we don't like. Like often we'll have a victim character, a rage-filled character. That was one of my big ones. We might have narcissistic characters, self-pitying characters. chronic health comes into this category as well, way further down the line. And they all serve a purpose. So when we speak to them and we get into this in detail, you realize that they've been doing the dirty work for you all these years. All the characters you like, I say, think of it like a team in the office. Like you work in a big office and you've got all these people there and work in a team. All the characters you like are just the fun boys. They're the guys who they're great for having a beer with. Like they have fun. They have a great time, but they don't do anything productive for you. They don't sort out the needs that you have to set your boundaries. They don't look after you. They don't say people pleasing is a big part of this. So lots of us have been raised to be people pleasers. We say to people what they want to hear, not what we actually want to say. And things like, without getting too into the detail with it, like a rage character exists because none of the other characters are saying what they really want to say.
That's huge to most of the people probably listening to this podcast, because it's typically guys who struggle with women, and they're overly nice, overly accommodating, and their main character is like this nice guy, but underneath there's just a ton of rage and anger and this frustration that women aren't seeing who they really are, because really they're just seeing these front men, and they don't know how to express some of these other characters who are way more attractive, or personalities, as we say. So that's a lot of the work that I do with guys, is helping them get out of just those characters that are really unattractive to women, that they're thinking work and realizing don't. So yeah, it's very fascinating what you're saying. This is really cool stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. It makes perfect sense. And so where that leads to then is you basically integrate the team.
Yeah.
So you get to a point where it's in your consciousness now. It's not happening subconsciously. I watch it happen now. Every now and then I'll be in a situation in which my subconscious is like, oh, give Kopi the mic. I'm like, no. I can deal with this now. But it takes practice and it takes time, and there's lots of exercises we do, and it's starting out small and building up to bigger stuff. And it's literally doing things like saying what you really want to say. And lots of the work I do seems very counterintuitive. Like I'll talk to people about it and they're like, I'm not sure that will work. I'm like, well, we do it. It's like the, I don't know how old you are, but it's like the original Karate Kid. Do you remember that movie?
Of course, yeah. I'm 39, so.
Oh, okay. We're similar age then. So, so the karate, that story, for anyone listening who doesn't know the original, I don't know what the remake was like, whether it had the same thing, but Joey wants to learn karate, goes to see an old guy, a master, and he gets him washing his cars, painting his fences, sweeping the floor. And after a while, he's like, I want to learn karate. What are you doing? And the old guy says, you've been learning karate all the way through. And he brings it all together, and now he's this karate expert. That's what this work is like a lot of the time. It's like, we do this thing, we do this thing, we do this thing, and people are like, really? And then when we pull all the strands together, it's like, wow, like I actually feel good enough now. So to tie it into a lot of the stuff you'll talk to your listeners about, like it's incredible for me because I've been the arrogant, cocky guy, pulling women and doing all that stuff, and thought at the time I was invincible, and realized through doing this work how fragile I was. Like it didn't take much at all to pierce me. Deep down, I wasn't happy. Now, in this new world where my self-esteem is really high, I'm really self-secure. Life is completely different. It's at this point I'm like, oh, this is actually what it feels like to be invincible. Because a huge part of this work is seeing your darkness for what it truly is. People often ask me if I'm a life coach, and I don't like that, because I'm like, no, for me, life coaching always comes across to me, and this may be unfair, but as people who are like, we focus on the positives and we get everyone to be happy all the time, and just tell everyone, you tell everyone you love yourself. And for me, it's like, yeah, whatever works for you. Like I always say that, whatever works for you, great. For me, it's bullshit surface stuff. Yeah. The stuff I do is like deep and dark and nasty, and we figure out who we really are. So where that leads you to is a place where you can just be comfortable being yourself. And there is nothing more attractive in the world, either to the opposite sex or to people you want to be friends with or to business associates. It's when the world starts coming to you, because it's like, yeah, I'm okay either way. The number of business deals I've done where it's like, yeah, I'm okay without it, so I'll just walk away. And it's like, there's no better negotiating position to be in.
Right.
So it ties into everything we do.
Yeah, completely. No, it's really cool. The the stuff, because everyone is just so busy trying to, seeking or trying to accomplish those things on their checklist, and they never really stop to see what's going on under the hood. So, yeah. So, what about having better relationships? How can this lead to that? I mean, obviously, if you can, the thing that comes to mind is if you know your personalities and you all of a sudden, like one of my personalities, as you were mentioning it, that's been coming up recently with my girlfriend is, I guess you call it like I call it the stingy Jew. I'm Jewish, so I can say that. But it's like she'll be like, baby, buy me this bag, or I want this, I want that, right? And I'll go into the stingy Jew character where I'm like, no, you can't have the bag, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, it just starts a fight, and I end up buying her the damn bag anyway. So it's like, and she wasn't out of line for asking for the bag. So I can immediately see how, like, okay, the stingy Jew Robbie comes out to play, be like, yeah, thanks, thanks for your service. We don't really need you now, or whatever. Can see what's going on without becoming immediately pulled into that sort of conversation. But so that's what's coming to mind as far as relationships. But tell me more.
So there's a few things we could get into. I'll tell you one of my favorite bits, and this doesn't just apply to relationships, but I can give you examples from my old relationship. And what I often refer to in the work I do, and especially with relationships with other people, and in romantic relationships especially, is magic tricks. So do you like magic?
Yeah.
So I was one of those kids when I was a little boy who had the little magic sets, and you'd learn how to do these little tricks, and I'd show them to my grandparents, and they'd respond like I was making the Statue of Liberty disappear or whatever. So I was always like, oh, I like this. This is good. It feels good. And I started getting into it, and I was about 17, 18 when David Blaine first hit the big time with his street magic show. And I remember at the time thinking, me and a friend were like, I want to learn how to do those tricks. So I started learning how to do a load of his stuff. This, as a bit of a side point, I remember watching his show and the reactions he was getting from people in the street, and I would show the same tricks. So you'd have all these American people on TV like screaming and like running away from him, like with their head in their hands, and I'd show the same trick to a British person, and they'd be like, "Yeah, it was good," and I'd be like, "I want a better reaction than that." And what I realised was, to get that same reaction from most British people, they need to be drunk. So I would wait until like 3 a.m. at the end of a night out, and I would show tricks to people on the streets of Liverpool after a night out. And I had a close friend at the time in university, and he hated it because I would get the reactions then that David Blaine was getting on TV, like, this is incredible. People would be like shouting people over, come and see this. Come. My friend hated it. So he would stand and stare at my hands, trying to figure out how I did it. I always say to people, this is, without giving away too much about magic for anyone who doesn't want to know, this is where most people go wrong when they're trying to figure out magic tricks, is that they're staring at the end. They watch they'll watch the magician's hands, or they'll watch the end of the trick, and they just can't figure it out. And most of the time, it's because the real magic in magic is that the trick was done ages ago. What you're watching most of the time is, there's a movie called The Prestige with, it's a Chris Nolan movie. Have you seen it? It's a great movie. Yeah. I love it. Mm-hmm. And they talk about the stages of a magic trick. And the last stage is The Prestige, which is basically the ta-da. Mm-hmm. And the best magicians on the planet are not necessarily the best magicians. They're the best show people. They're the best people at presenting a trick to people. And this is where we all get lost. Because in life, what we tend to do, and this is the analogy, is we're always looking at the prestige. Mm-hmm. So we get lost. Even when you tell that story, You tell a story about a problem with your partner when she wants a bag and you don't want her to buy the bag. And we obsess on that. And we try and figure out what's wrong with that. And the problem is that's just the magic trick. That's the end of the magic trick. Where the trick was actually done, which is where we need to look, is 35 years ago in your childhood. Because the way we interact with other humans, especially romantic partners, was formed by the way we learned how to attach to people as kids. So think about this. We can go in all over the place. Think about this as like when you come out as a kid, you're like a new computer, a laptop. You've got some basic programs installed, which different people have got different beliefs about that. It doesn't really matter what you believe. But most of what you need to know as a human, you don't know yet. Other people have to teach you this stuff. And your original caregivers, whether that's your mum and dad or grandparents who raised you or foster home, whoever it was, they're the people we look to say, train me. The people in our control deck are like, right, we need some programs to put into the computer. We've got nothing. So we start to learn how to do things. And one of the things we learn how to do is how to attach to other people. So there's a whole world called attachment theory, which is all about how we form romantic relationships, especially in our adult years, and how that traces right back. So there are some cliches around this stuff that are based on reality. So you may have heard things in the past about how men will end up marrying their mom, women will end up marrying their dad. And there is truth in that, because the reality is, in a sort of very traditional sense, and it's not as simple as this because there are nuances to it, but a heterosexual girl will learn how to attach to a man through her relationship with her dad. And a heterosexual man will learn how to attach to a woman through his relationship with his mum. And there are nuances to this, and there's exceptions. But for that, Joe, as a generalization, I remember, so I was with my ex for 12 years, married for 6. And it wasn't until the last year when I started doing this work, it was like someone started clicking their fingers and bringing me out of a trance. All of a sudden, I'd be watching her do something and think, my mum does that. Like that exact same thing my mum does. And I've never seen it before. But at some subconscious level, that's what I need to connect with. And this ties into loads. We could talk for hours just on this one topic. But where it comes back to the self-esteem point is, most relationships we create when we've started out with low self-worth are dysfunctional. So this again is another thing that in society gets talked about as if it's normal. So we see it in Hollywood movies, loads of really famous Hollywood movies that women are grown up to love, and men are like, oh, I've got to be like the hero. They're actually dysfunctional relationships that we then model. So one of the most famous lines when I was growing up, Jerry Maguire, the Tom Cruise line of "You complete me."
Right.
That's one of the most dysfunctional lines you could ever hear. Once you've done this work, you're like, it's awful. Like
that's got a toxic relationship written all over it.
Absolutely. The idea that another human should complete you is dysfunctional. The way we build healthy relationships is we get one person who's 100% secure in themselves with good self-esteem, and another person who's exactly the same, and they come together. That's what a healthy relationship is. So this is where doing this work helps relationships as well. And then to flip back into what we were saying about the childhood stuff, when you've got a specific example of something that's going on, if you can go back into childhood and go, okay, what's this really about? Often, I'll give you the example that always springs to mind for me. I used to always, in my old relationship, we lived in several different places together. I would always have a problem with wherever the table was so we had a city centre apartment, and as soon as I walked in, there was a dining table with chairs, and my ex would just cover that with crap. Like there would be mess, there would be boxes, she'd open letters and just leave them there. And I'd come in from a busy day at work and say, it depresses me, I'm quite tidy, I don't like seeing this. Could you please keep this table tidy? And she would say yes. And then I'd come in the next day and it would be untidy again. And we had this argument on loop for 12 years. And when I think about my mum and dad have just gone 50 years married. Me and my sister always joke about it. They have the same arguments every week that they've been having for 50 years. It's incredible. What I learned doing all this work was it was nothing to do with the table. So what's actually happening when I say to my partner, will you keep this table tidy? What my subconscious is saying is, do you love me? And when she says, yes, I will keep it tidy, I hear, yes, I do love you. And when I come in the next day and she hasn't kept it tidy, I hear, no, you don't love me. And on top of that, it's because I'm not worthy of love. And this is where we get really deep into it all. And this goes back to childhood, because this goes back to being raised. And this is quite dark for a lot of us, and a realization that we talk about unconditional love in life a lot. But actually, when we're completely honest and we look at this, the way, and this goes, again, nobody's fault, goes back generations, just the way we raise kids at the moment. Most of the love we get as kids is conditional without ever knowing that. So when we interact with our parents, we will feel, this might not be the case, but this is what we feel. This goes back to the trauma point, that when we are good, we are loved more. Just by the way they act. Think about the way parents are with kids. I don't like it when you cry. And what we feel as a kid is, okay, you don't love me as much when that happens. And then fast forward all these years later, we end up in relationships where we're basically repeating the same dynamic without knowing it. And it's all happening subconsciously. So I mean, there's loads in this. The very basic is going back to childhood, figuring out what the issue really is, and then bringing that back into the present day and saying, okay, what is going on here really? If we ignore the magic trick, what's really going on? What do I feel? When you ask for this thing, what do I feel? Why don't I want to give it to you? What's going on? Is there a pattern in my childhood that I'm repeating? Is there a pattern in your childhood that you're repeating? Because what you often find is two people have come together because they're like the opposite sides of a broken coin. So I look back at my ex and her mum and dad, and I can see loads of me in them. And without realizing it, she's subconsciously being drawn to that because that's what she's comfortable with.
Right. You know, it's interesting because I've oftentimes asked myself, like, where does this, going back to that story that you mentioned that I talked about, the cheap Robbie character, I'll ask myself, like, how did I become like that? Because I can't really remember a time in my childhood where people were cheap with me or we didn't have enough. I grew up in a family. We were comfortable, normal, happy family. Parents still together for 42 years or something now. But we never had any of this sort of thing going on. So what happens when you can't remember? Or you try to trace it back, but there's just you don't really get anywhere.
So that happens fairly regularly, and it's because it happened to me a lot. I don't have a lot of childhood memories.
Yeah.
And it's because, especially if you were a sensitive child, part of what our subconscious does to protect us is shut down memories. So you don't remember them. And it's incredible how often I'll be talking to somebody, and just by talking about this stuff more, you almost say to your subconscious, right, it's safe to remember this stuff now. So let's start bringing it up. And my technique with coaching people is very different to a lot of other coaches. Lots of coaches will just ask questions, and I say that's fine. And if that works for you, again, great. But if people are stuck and you just keep asking them questions, they don't get anywhere. So what I'll often do is share stories, tell stories, talk about different things. And it's incredible how often, as someone's just listening to a story, they'll say, I've just thought of something that I've completely forgotten about until now. So if you've got someone to talk to about stuff, I'd encourage talking. I always say the only way we can think properly really is to talk or to write, because that is how we start actually getting things moving outside of our heads. So if you've got someone to talk to about it, a coach, a therapist, perfect. If not, someone you can trust to just open up and start talking about it. And if not, something that's been huge in my life and is huge in all the people I coach is write stuff down. So free write. Start writing about childhood.
I was going to ask you because I do Well, I used to do it religiously, a daily journal. I haven't been doing it as much, but oftentimes just the act of journaling will allow me to remember all sorts of things. And I tell all my clients, and I'm a huge proponent of journaling. So I was going to ask you if that's a integral part of it. Sounds like yes.
Huge, yeah, absolutely. It's amazing what can come out, because I always say to people as well, don't type on a computer, write with a pen or pencil on paper. And I used to say, I don't know why it's better, but it just feels better. And the theory I've come to now, which I've got no scientific backing for, it just feels instinctively right, is that when we write, or we put a pen or pencil in our hand and start writing on paper, it opens the creative side of our brain. So it helps to switch off the part of us that's constantly rationalizing everything. Which that's where we've been taught. We've all been taught to stay in our heads loads. And this work is all about coming back into your heart, basically, getting back into your feelings, your instincts, and going into that. And it's incredible how you start with a blank piece of paper or a pad, and you write at the top, where did this stingy character come from? And then just start writing and writing and writing, and don't stop. Just write about your childhood. Let it flow. And even if it's saying, I don't know where this comes from, my mum was lovely and my mum did this, and I remember one day she took me here and my dad did this and my uncle did this. And it's incredible how often you might be writing for 2 or 3 pages, but all of a sudden something just comes out and you think, I had no idea that was there.
Yeah, I mean, that's often what I experience too. And you doing that work is so eye-opening. It's like, my favorite time to journal is when I'm really pissed off. Yeah. And instead of, going into that rageful character and doing something I'll regret, I'll just start banging away on my keyboard. Like, fuck this person. This is bullshit, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, it's it's something completely different typically. And all of that anger and rage magically transferred into my journal, and it's no longer an issue after, sometimes it can take a while, but
perfect. Yeah. I love it. And something I'll add to that, which is something I only developed a while ago, is I got to a point where that worked well. But then there were times when I was like, I don't feel like it's out of me. Like, right. I still feel energy. It's still inside me. And I would very much recommend whoever's listening, if you're going to do this, and I recommend doing it, do it by yourself in a room where nobody can see you, because otherwise everyone's going to think you are insane. But I would say it out loud as if I was saying it to whoever I wanted to speak to. So really rant the way you were, as you were talking about it, then you could see the emotion. Like, really say it. Like, scream at people. Let it, as if they're standing right in front of you. And it's incredible how, something I talk about a lot now is, when we talk about emotions, most people, we never stop to think about what they are. But emotions are just chemical reactions inside our body. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head, it's in the book. There's a scientist who basically came up with this idea that an emotion, the chemical reaction of an emotion, if you leave it by itself, only lasts 90 seconds. So think about when we often are depressed for years, decades. We're creating that. We're creating ourselves a loop. And one of the ways we can let this stuff out, there's loads of stuff about this in the physical healing world, somatic healing and stuff like that, is literally to let it out. So say it out loud. If you can write it, type it, whatever, and that works, brilliant. If it feels like it's still there, say it. Scream.
Yeah, whenever I have the chance. I live with my girlfriend, but when she's not home sometimes, I'll just let it rip and scream and yell. And I saw on TV a long time ago. It was some infomercial. I think I was probably 15 or 16 years old. It was actually like it looked like a ironing board and a stick, and it was just like a beating thing to get out your anger. So when you're pissed off, instead of like breaking glasses and destroying your house, just take out this stick and you start beating this ironing board, and it has a noise, and it's got the satisfaction like you're breaking something. And I always wanted to get one, because when I get pissed off on the golf course, I'm breaking clubs for sure. And then the second that club breaks, like all of that anger just immediately disappears. And it just like that emotion switches from anger to like I don't know what it is, shame that I just broke the club.
100%. That's exactly what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it from a personality perspective, this is really important. So what happens is that your rage character often only gets on the microphone for a short period of time. And the way I always picture it is like when you can start picturing them all as different people, they come on, they grab the mic, they smash something, they scream at someone, and then they just drop the mic and walk off.
Right, mic drop.
It's a mic drop. And then
Yeah.
the next character to pick it up is your shame character. Your shame character walks over and sees the mic and like, oh no, not again. And they pick up the mic then and like, what the like, can we stop this, please? And when you can start seeing this, what you can start doing is going, right, can we please have someone else earlier in the chain? Because think rage in particular, I could talk about rage and anger all day. Is the mic being passed down the chain? It's like, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. You deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. And that's us not dealing with anger. And what most people confuse is anger and rage. Anger's really healthy. If we deal with anger when it's just anger, we never see rage.
Mm-hmm.
And dealing with anger is literally being able to say to someone out loud, don't do that. That really pisses me off. And there's loads of us who are like, oh, I couldn't do that.
Right.
Because I can't risk upsetting somebody or them not liking me. So this all ties together. But yeah, I remember seeing, I remember years ago thinking I was going to set up a business in the city centre. Like every city centre, just a place where people can go and smash stuff up. But it looks like people have done it. Yeah.
No, they haven't done that. They've, as far as I know, they only created this.
The ironing board and the stick.
But no, so I have another question. How you doing on time? Are you okay to go?
Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah.
Going back to that golf analogy, because I played golf for university and thought about going pro, but was never good enough. So, I still enjoy playing, but now when I play, I get way more frustrated than I think I ever did because my expectations are still of when I was like a collegiate athlete shooting even par under par. Now I'm going to go out and, be lucky to shoot, 75 or even 80 wouldn't be a bad round. But in my mind, I'm not satisfied unless I'm, under par or even par, and I'll hit a bad shot. And the immediate sort of emotion is, you're a fucking loser. You suck. Like, this is this horrible self-talk. And then that, I'll deal with that however I'm going to deal with it and get a little bit more angry. And then if the bad shots keep coming, which typically it's a vicious circle, and the more angry you get, the worse your shots become, the worse you concentrate. Then eventually the clubs start flying, broken clubs, this, that, and then the shame guy comes out. So is there a way to because trying to I'm aware of it, but that doesn't really help me much in the out there on the course.
Yeah. So, and this is really interesting because the ex-pro footballer I was talking to, or have been coaching, I asked him about whether he thought, because instinctively I feel like this work would be brilliant for sports people at any level, whether he thought this work would have helped him while he was a pro. And he said 100%. And I said, when you think about the way you've just described then is perfect. Like when there is no pressure on us, whatever level we are at anything, it's pressure that affects performance. So let's talk about elite athletes. If you get an elite golfer and you give him or her a 10-foot putt on a normal green, they can sink that on the practice green 95 times out of 100, maybe more. Mm-hmm. You say to them, this is to win, to win the Masters.
Yeah.
You've got millions of people watching you. You're going to win, I don't know what the prize money is for the Masters, a couple of $1 million. All of a sudden it changes. Why does it change? And when you go deep underneath that, it all comes back to this same stuff most of the time. So it's the pressure of failure. Well, why are we worried about failure? Because we worry what people think of us. Because we worry we're not good enough if we don't do it. And when you watch anyone play any sport at any level, just for fun, generally speaking, they're relaxed. They get the best out of themselves. So the key with all of this is the same, and that's why I like this book is called How to Solve Any Problem in Life. Because you come to me with anything, you say to me, I lose my temper on a golf course. I say, great, let's talk about your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, and you say, what?
Right.
I go, and I start talking to you about ice creams and magic tricks, and then it's the Karate Kid stuff because you're like, Paul, I want to make my golf game better. I'm like, we're making your golf game better. Be patient.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately it comes down to that. So once you've got to a point in your life where you go, it's okay for me to hit a bad golf shot. The magic trick here is I hit a bad golf shot. Deep down, I don't think I'm good enough as a human. And it's like, really? Is that true? And I'm like, that's where we are. That's what happens. And that's why it builds up, because the next time it's like, right, I've got to hit this one properly. Why? Well, I'm a piece of shit if I don't hit this one properly.
Right.
You do it 3-4 times, it's like, oh, this is awful. We don't know how to express that properly. So you start off by going, okay, repair your self-worth. Know that you're good enough even if you hit a bad shot. Something that I love to talk about, like elite. I'm a football, soccer fan. And I say, look at the elite goal scorers. Like Mo Salah plays for Liverpool. Yeah. When he misses chances, he often smiles. He just laughs. I always say to people, Lionel Messi, arguably the greatest footballer of all time. Do you know how many shots he takes on average to score one goal?
No.
6.
Okay.
He has a 16% success rate. That's awful to most people. We as mere mortals expect to hit every golf shot absolutely right. Lionel Messi's the best footballer that's ever lived out of billions of humans. And he gets 1 in 6.
Right.
Why? He's all right with the other 5. He's happy to miss them. Why? I've got to miss them. I've got to, and this is the where we can go from the self-worth stuff into practical stuff. And we say, well, look, okay, if I'm going to, what do I want to hit on this golf course today? And that's what, I mean, this ties into pressure and ability and all the rest of it. But you factor in how many bad shots you can have. Can I have bad shots? What's worst case scenario? What if I have a bad round? What if I hit 10 over? So what?
Yeah. And
if you can truly get, and there's a difference, I always say there's a difference between knowing it up here in your head and knowing it down here in your heart. Like loads of the way through this, people get it in their head. Like, I get it. But it's not until you truly understand it deep down that you're like, yeah, I embrace that now. If you can, once you can truly get to the point where you're like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I hit 10 over par. It doesn't matter if I hit 20 shots on every hole. I'm just here to have fun. Yeah. Then the irony is, and I said before about it being counterintuitive, the irony is that makes you more likely to hit good shots.
Right.
Because you're playing with less pressure.
Yeah, it's a huge game changer. One more thing I want to ask you about, I think you mentioned in your book that a lot of this work can actually heal, like physical pain and illness. So can you tell us a little bit how that works as well?
Yeah, I purposefully left this chapter till right at the end of the book, because this is stuff, most of the stuff I talk about, to most people, they're like, it's crazy. Until they start doing it. And like, yeah, okay. The health stuff, I only talk about usually to people who are already interested in this stuff, because it sounds so insane until you start walking through it. So I actually learned a lot of the stuff I do now and pulling it together with other things from a coach in New York who I went to with chronic health issues. And I decided, Western medical world again, just treats symptoms, was pumping me full of drugs. But the doctors were saying, we don't know what causes the issues. We don't know how to cure them. There is no cure. And I started doing research on the internet, and I was like, there are people healing themselves. Found this coach. He'd done it. He coached other people to do it. Started learning all of this stuff. And at a very basic level, there's loads in this about the multiple personalities and adaptations. So basically, if you think of physical illnesses or any type of illness, the way we're taught to think about them is they're bad. But actually, if you start thinking of just adaptations, it's just your body's way of telling you something's wrong. And most of the time, the thing that's wrong is we're repressing who we really are. So we have spent, think about and this is to tie it back into science, and I'm sure loads of doctors would say this is nonsense, and that's fine. If you go back to an emotion is a chemical reaction, well, guess what happens if you repress millions of chemical reactions over your lifespan? Every day, instead of letting out anger, you bury it. And you just keep burying it and keep burying it. Well, it has an impact on you internally. And over time, these things manifest themselves. So again, I talk about the team in your control deck. They'll do things for different reasons. So our personalities exist.
Wasn't there a doctor who said the issues are in the tissues? Have you heard that before?
I've heard that phrase. Yeah, I don't know who it was. There's loads of people. This is the funny thing. There's loads of people who believe this stuff. It's just, I'm very cynical about the world these days, and generally anyway, because ultimately we've built a world around money. That's what we've done. And the reality is, if you say to people in the pharmaceutical industry or the medical profession that runs with money from the pharmaceutical industry, if you say to them, do you know we can heal 90% of these things by thinking nicer thoughts and eating more carrots, they're not interested. Like, no. That would wipe out the pharmaceutical business. It's a multi-$100 billion industry. Yeah. They don't care. They would rather pump you full of drugs for the rest of your life. And I'm like, well, that's okay. Well, I'm one of the people now who's saying to people, you can heal it another way, because often what I'll say to people is, without getting into the weeds, is think about these things. Most illnesses, like my chronic illnesses, they just came out of nowhere. And I say, well, if they can come out of nowhere, they can leave out of nowhere, can't they? If we get into, and something I don't know how much time you've got, but I love talking about, like, if a doctor in a white coat hasn't got an explanation for you, why should we listen to them? They're basically saying, I don't know. I learned something a few months ago from another coach I'm working with, which I loved. And I'd never heard this before. Have you ever heard the word idiopathic?
No. But
So it sounds fancy, doesn't it? Yeah. So she was saying, this is a word doctors use. They'll say, oh, that's an idiopathic disease. Idiopathic, look up the meaning, it's brilliant. Idiopathic basically means we don't know. So instead of saying we don't know, they come up with a fancy word so that it looks like they're still right. Well, we can trust this person. They're using a long word. It sounds like they know what they're talking about. But what they're basically saying is, we don't know. And I'm like, well, I often say, I'll tell a quick story to end, but I often say, if you had a car, a modern car, and it's got an onboard computer system, like most modern cars do, that run everything. If that car started making a really loud noise, and you took it to the mechanic you've always been to, your family have been to, and the mechanic looked at the physical part of the car and said, there's nothing wrong with it. If you said to them, well, have you checked the onboard computer system? And they said, no. You'd say, why? And if they said, well, we don't think the onboard computer system's got anything to do with the physical part of the car, you'd be like, well, that's crazy. It's the onboard computer system. It runs everything. There's a mechanic down the road who says he can get the onboard computer system working properly and it fixes this problem. That's exactly the same as we've got in Western medicine now. It was in the 16th or 17th century. They made a decision that the head and the body are separate. Mm-hmm. So Western medicine decided, Eastern medicine is different. It's like the old school still. But Western medicine decided your head's got nothing to do with the rest of your body. And I'm like, well, isn't that just insane?
It is.
Like,
yeah.
It's insane. And then their best explanation for things is we don't know. I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to go and try this thing because this person over here is saying that using the power of your mind, the mind-body connection, and even that phrase, when I started getting into this, there's a world about the mind-body connection. Well, even that phrase, your head is literally attached to your body. It's not like I'm saying if you think better, it'll make me better. I'd understand if someone said to me, that's crazy, Paul. I'm saying if I think differently, I can change things inside my own body. And I get it. Like I always say to people, I've changed completely. I talk about the old me and the new me. And if the old me was talking to the new me, the old me who's the lawyer would be saying, you've gone insane. You've gone mad. And I'm quite happy with that because I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Try it. What's the worst that can happen? Like there are literally, like we're being pumped full of drugs by the Western medical profession that are full of side effects, dangerous side effects. What's the worst that can happen if you try an alternative route that has got no side effects? Nothing. Your worst case scenario is it doesn't work. You can go back to the drugs if you want.
Sure.
I can talk about this all day, but the last point is my favorite point on this, and I said this to a client months ago, and he said he just keeps repeating it since. You heard of the placebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
So for the person listening, if they don't know, like when to get a drug approved these days, they will do like a double-blind study. So you'll get the drug, and they'll get a group of people, maybe 100 people in each group, more than that if you can. But for the sake of simplicity, they'll give 100 people the drug and they'll give 100 people a sugar pill that's got nothing in it, a placebo. And they don't tell either. It's double blind, so nobody in the groups knows whether they got the drug or the placebo. And the doctors don't know either until the end who got what. And what will often happen is they'll say, so we've done the study and 70% of people in the drug group got better and 30% of people in the placebo group got better. And what this shows us is we should authorize the drug and start giving it to people. And I was like, but let's just imagine for a second, we live in a world where no one's interested in making money. If you lived in that world and you got given the results of that study, isn't the first thing you'd say, but hang on, 30% of the people we gave a sugar pill to got better? Why? We basically told them they might get a drug that would make them better. And they got better. And people always say, yeah, that's just a placebo effect. And I'm like, well, people just magically get better from taking sugar pills. Isn't that way more interesting? Like, why aren't we focusing everything we have on that and figuring out why those 30 people heal? And the simple answer to that is it doesn't make people enough money.
Right. Doesn't pay. Yeah, and that's so true. And I love that metaphor that you said earlier about the mind-body connection, and it is so fascinating. I guess by the time, like, if you're burying emotions and not dealing with, what's happening, you're burying that stuff down, eventually that usually will manifest in some sort of physical illness a lot of the time. Could take years or whatever. And then once you have it, it seems just, I guess, the logical train of thought would be, well, it's going to take that long to essentially undo all of those emotions you've buried. But I guess as I'm talking about it, why would it have to take that long if you can dump a lot of these issues that you might have not been dealing with through what you're talking about? This is healing, right? You could heal yourself, it seems like.
100%. I've seen people heal overnight.
Yeah.
And it's different for everybody. It depends what's going on inside you. It depends how easily you can let go of stuff. But yeah, it takes different amounts of time for different people. But 100%, it's real. And that's the thing I love about this the most is it's real. There's a quote in the book by a doctor, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's an author in this field as well. And he says we practice medicine the way we do in the West, despite the evidence to the contrary. It's not like it's not there. There are studies that show these connections, and we just don't look into it. So one of the things I encourage, and one of the big parts of the work I do, and it's in the book, is take responsibility for your own life. Everything in your life, including health. And if you speak to a doctor and you're like, not sure, go and check. We live in an incredible, the era we live is an incredible era for access to information. And lots of people will talk that down. I see it a lot. YouTubers get criticized a lot. Like, oh, did you learn that off YouTube? I've learned some of the most incredible things in my life from YouTube.
Yeah.
It's an awesome resource. So
my washing machine on YouTube.
There we go. There we go. I don't understand why people dismiss it. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's there's so much. And I got into a fight the other day with my girlfriend over my eye, basically, because she was telling me go to the doctor. And growing up in the U.S., like, you don't go to the doctor because you might get slapped with like a $3,000 bill.
Of course, yeah.
Just to, because of our healthcare system and the insurance is so fucked. Here in Ukraine, you can go see a doctor, a specialist for $20, but that's not my mentality. So I'm like, I'm not going to go. And it should just kind of heal itself. And eventually we went like 4 or 5 days later, and the doctor's like, it's a good thing you came, because you waited 1 or 2 more days. This could have been really, really bad. And then we got in this fight because she's like, I told you to go earlier. And I'm like, well, that's just not how we do things in the US.
Well, there's loads in just that. And this, it's an important thing to say, actually. The stuff I talk about, it is important. Like, I'm not, like, I've got nothing against doctors and Western medicine means we all live until, our generation will probably on average live till they're 100 years old. Well, that's because of Western medicine and penicillin and antibiotics and all the rest of it. So all of those things, fantastic, the things that work. This is all about when they're quietly saying they don't know what they're talking about and they just don't really want to say that out loud.
Right.
Well, then maybe there's an alternative. Why don't we explore and this all, for me, there's a chapter at the end of the book about changing the world. This is where I say this is the real pandemic, is low self-worth. Because if everybody's self-worth was repaired and we all felt good enough, no one would ever feel threatened by any of this stuff. A doctor would say to you, yeah, I know how to fix your eye. If you break your arm, I'll put it back together. I can stitch you up if you're in a car accident. Bowel conditions, to be honest, we don't really know. But there's some people who think you can fix that through the mind-body connection. So have a go at that.
Right.
If everybody's self-worth is in the right place, that's just a normal, healthy conversation. It's when our egos, and this is the other side of stuff we haven't talked about, so all these characters we talk about collectively, that's effectively what your ego is when we talk about the ego. Well, the world is effectively run by egos. So it's, no, I can't be wrong. I've been practicing medicine for 50 years and we're right and you're wrong. And I'm like, okay.
Right.
So this world is all about, look, you find complete peace in life by repairing your self-worth and being able to say, it's okay. I don't need to be right all the time. Even with this stuff. If someone says to me now, you're talking nonsense, look, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I am.
Right.
If you think I am, it's like the Henry Ford quote. Joe, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Right.
It's like that with this. If someone says to me, well, I don't believe this will change my life, I go to them, you're right. It won't change your life against your will. It's not a magic trick. Like, it's work. You need to put work into it. So if you don't believe in it, of course it won't work.
Yeah, and it's hard work, to have these conversations and invest the time and the energy on as you mentioned, your childhood and healing some of these traumas and trying to figure out what the fuck happened way back in the day. You lost your ice cream and you never dealt with it. Well, now you got to deal with it. So
Exactly.
a lot of the a lot of the things you've spoken about, I've done some version just in a different way in the work that I've done. And yeah, the people who haven't done that work, it's pretty obvious the people who have versus haven't. I really appreciate you coming on, and that there's just always so much more work to do on that. And there's just the wisdom you've shared has been really cool. It's been one of my favorite interviews ever on the podcast. And I think the other people listening will agree. So where can we grab your book and get more info? Because this stuff's very profound and life-changing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. So the book is literally in the final stages of being published now. So it's going to be out in the next couple of weeks. And what I always liked, I did in the first book, and I'm going to do with this book, is I give away the first few chapters for free. So people can read the first few chapters, see if it's for them. If they like it, great, they can buy it. If they don't, no strings attached. You can stroll off into the sunset. And And that's all part of the work I've done, because it's like, I don't want you paying for my book and giving me money if you don't like it. So they can go to my website, which is paul7cope.com//free chapters. And you'll be able to download either the text version or the audio version, and try it out.
Very cool. Sounds like a deal. How can you go wrong with that? So I'll be diving into it. You sent me a copy. Thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
So it's been awesome, man. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And yeah, can't wait to dive in more to the book.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thanks for listening. If you want more, go to innerconfidence.com and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for the latest episodes.